Good evening. It's the industrial policy of today which will set the pattern for tomorrow, for all our tomorrows in the Britain of the 80s. What that policy must aim for is more investment, more productivity, more jobs. Before Lou Gardner talks to the Secretary of State for Industry, we're going to look at one harsh example of the problems industrial policy faces. Our example is a once great factory now preparing for its own funeral. From Clydebank, where unemployment already runs at 11%, Brian Gould reports.
The Singer factory today has lost some of its glamour. The workforce is now down to 3,000, but Singer is still the town's biggest employer, and 8 out of every 10 sewing machines made here are still sent to export markets. But someone must have known something. The Clydebank coat of arms, proudly incorporating a Singer sewing machine, was redesigned in 1975, and the sewing machine disappeared. Last month, the US management pronounced a death sentence. In June, the factory will close. 3,000 jobs will be lost, and the unions have accepted the inevitable.
Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 58.
And what's going to happen come June?
Oh, well, at 50, I just want to get another job, that's all.
Do you live in Clydebank?
I do, all my life. I can't see myself getting another job. I just can't see it at all.
We're in a situation where we've young lads of 19 coming in and making inquiries, asking what entitlements under redundancy payments and that now. It's sinful to see lads that are only starting their working life to be starting to talk about redundancies.
The Space Age shopping centre outside Singer's gates may soon outlive its brief success. The Singer closure has cast a pall of gloom over the whole town. And not only gloom, but cynicism too.
There was certainly one rumour quite recently that when the top American management were over here looking at the factory, scratching their heads, wondering what to do with it, the one chap said to the other, the only thing we can do with this thing is do a Saigon. When asked what that meant, he said, we put all the American management into a helicopter, lift off, throw the keys out and say, there you are, fellas, it's all yours.
Well, it's a disaster. It's a psychological disaster, I think, in particular, because Singers have always been the basic big-name firm in the area. It's a tradition and a living tradition which people have been with for a very long time, and suddenly it's gone. And obviously it's a blow would be difficult to recover from.
I might as well give you a smile about the last one you'll get.
So somebody has to pick up the pieces. The workforce hope they can still make spare parts for Singer factories abroad, and that other firms will step in to do light engineering in the better parts of the factory. But that would save only a few of the 3,000 jobs. Saving more might well need outside help.
The government has said that there is going to be plenty of money for any incoming industry, and I welcome that assurance. George Younger actually used the word, the place would be awash with money. The difficulty is that he's got to really go further than that. He's got to prove that the Scottish office isn't a wholly owned subsidiary of the Department of Industry. He's got to, I think, say, if we don't get private enterprise coming in, you know, Sir Keith Joseph's famous galvanised entrepreneur, if he doesn't appear, then I think the government's got to move in and do the job itself.
You don't have to turn the clock.
In a Glasgow department store, Singer machines were hard to find. The only demonstrator was for a machine made in Japan. There are also plenty of machines from Taiwan. As with cars, so with sewing machines. It's the ones from abroad which seem to offer that little bit more for your money, including totally free after-sales service for 5 years. The critics say that the American management have run the company so badly that it's hardly surprising they couldn't withstand foreign competition. Singer chose not to defend themselves on TVI. In their words, they preferred to keep a low profile. How long has the writing been on the wall for Singers at Clydebank?
Ooh, much longer than I think most people imagine. Maybe 20 years, something like that, since Singer Clydebank started to become irrelevant to the global strategy of Singer as a manufacturing company.
The Singer factory at Clydebank became irrelevant because the American management found they could get a better return on investment in brand new factories elsewhere. First in Italy and Germany, and then on the principle that if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, in Eastern Europe and the Far East. So when the cutthroat competition intensified, it was on Clydebank that the axe fell first.
They have taken the skills from Clydebank over the last 2 decades, managerial skills, engineering skills, developed them at Clydebank, and use them in other parts of the world. You only have to go across to the Italian factory. It's a modern one-storey factory.
Whereas at Clydebank, they have to struggle with acres of old six-storey buildings. Despite the old buildings, there's nothing wrong with much of the machinery. They could turn out the goods if they were being fully used. As ever, it's not easy to pin down the reasons.
The full capacity of that plant, we're talking units per week, is somewhat over 20,000 units per week. At present, we're only producing 8,000 because that's all the company want, and this is where I put the question mark against productivity. We've had a situation where I've asked my members in the assembly and the arm line to give more, and the following week the company come along and saying, sorry, we don't want them because we can't sell them, and the company cutting back.
The Singer management tell a different story. Clydebank productivity has been the worst of any of their 11 major plants around the world. And when these shop stewards commissioned an independent report at the end of last year, it showed that production could have been increased by up to 20% without any new investment.
We could have done more, and we've always said we've done more. We said, give us the tools and we'll do the job. We do not believe, and I don't think anyone can accept it, that we're in a day and an age where we're asking people to work on the same basis of people in Taiwan and North Korea, working 50 hours and working Saturdays and Sundays and all the rest of it. I don't think even the British government, the present British government, or even the American employers expect that of British workers. It's all very well getting flexibility and movement of labour when you're expanding. Trying to do it when you're in a retraction situation is very, very difficult.
How many machines are supposed to come off this assembly line?
126 a day.
And do you usually hit that target?
Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't.
And why don't you sometimes?
Well, a shortage of parts and...
But whose fault is that?
Well, I think it's the management's fault. Because if we would get the work, we could probably do it.
Has this line moved this morning so far?
No.
And that's a couple of hours ago?
Yes. Since 10 to 8 this morning.
And what happens to your pay packet if you don't hit the target?
We lose money.
Your workers aren't daft. They know what's going on in the factory. If they know that they're not getting the best tools to do the job, if they know that every 2 or 3 years the sales department has to turn around and say, sorry, we can't sell the stuff, folks, some of you are going to have to be laid off, then why should the workforce trust management to be doing their job efficiently, their job effectively? If they don't trust the management, why should they themselves wire in and respond to calls for higher productivity? It's perfectly understandable. It's in human nature. They'll stand back and say, oh, go you. And we get into all the sort of destructive behaviour which we can witness in many poorly run factories in Britain. The go-slows, the labour relations disputes, the chap who'll work hard for 5 hours of his shift and then do nothing for the next 2 hours because he's already made the quota he wants to make. It's all silly. It's a daft way to try and run an economy.
One of this year's winners, a retailing firm, not a manufacturing company, have a large and busy shop just over the road from Singer. Why have Mothercare chalked up record profits this year, while Singer are being forced to close?
Primary difference is that the management of Mothercare can work out their demand projections very precisely. They've got a damn good idea of how many babies are going to be born over the next N generations. So they can plan their investment, they can plan their administration, they can plan their marketing down to the last detail in the long term, and they know that they're going to be able to make a worthwhile profit out of what they're doing. Now that's really the primary condition. If you want to get sustained long-term investment in the sort of things that give you the kind of productivity that enable you to compete worldwide and dispose of all these silly labour problems and all the rest, then you've got to have a set of economic policies which keep your economy and all the bits of it going like that, not like that.
And one of the things that make it go like that is the ups and downs of the pound. You can now get a staggering 25% more Japanese yen to the pound than you could at the beginning of the year. And that fact alone means that a Japanese sewing machine selling at £100 in January could now be offered at £81. And that's hardly going to encourage investment in Clydebank. At the end of 1978, Singer was still talking of a $20 million investment in a slimmed-down Clydebank. But by the time the workers had finally decided to accept it, the logic of closure, the declining market, intense foreign competition, low productivity, had become overwhelming. After June next year, sewing machines will never again be made at Clydebank.
If we sit back as a manufacturing nation and allow our markets to be flooded without taking any import controls or taking any control whatsoever, a decade from now it'll not be Singers, it'll not be there. It'll be the whole manufacturing base, the motor car industry, the steel industry. We've already seen it happen with the shipbuilding. We've got to say as a nation now, if we're going to survive as a manufacturing nation, we've got to take control, because what's happening at present, we're just being picked off bit by bit. West of Scotland at present, it'll be the northeast of England next, it'll be the Midlands next. As far as we're concerned, we've got to be something done. There's got to be done now.
Brian Gould reporting on the problems of Clydebank. So Keith, low productivity, low investment, not just the problems of Singer and Clydebank, but the problem of Britain as a whole, isn't it? Can you change that?
Somebody said on that film that the problem's been going on for 20 years. In fact, it's been longer than that. Of course, there are other stories than that one, and I'm not an expert on what's happened at Singer. There could have been a film of a factory with excellent management and cooperative workforce, and a success story. Plenty of them in Britain, large and small.
Would it have been typical of British industry?
Plenty of them, and plenty of factories with reasonable management and uncooperative workforce, and plenty of factories with not so reasonable management and a willing workforce, and some with sour both. We got very patchy performance from the brilliant to the not good, but the end result is that we're, as a proportion of our total output, we still export more than any other nation. We're selling a third of our output of manufactured goods abroad. So there's bags of talent here, bags of management talent, design talent, marketing talent, inventive talent, and a lot of cooperative workforces. But of course the average performance is not nearly as good as it could be. So we have Singer stories with all sorts of problems that I can't understand from that film alone.
Can you make the average better? Can this government make it better? And if so, how?
Start to make. Not make direct, but create conditions in which some of the obstacles to good management and cooperative workforces come to an end. After all, for a number of years now, we've made it very difficult for management. Governments have. There have been controls upon controls upon controls. There's been an avalanche of legislation and regulations. In many places, the workforces have not been cooperative. Not everywhere, not by any means everywhere, but in many places. Sometimes reflecting past bad management, sometimes reflecting history. And the result has been that British management, more than any other management in the world, has been distracted by having to cope with minute by minute and hour by hour industrial relation problems. And as a result, they haven't been able, even when they're good managers, to give the time to all the tasks of serving the customer. That film showed very clearly that the real employer in this country is the customer. It's the customer that switches to jeans and therefore makes sewing machines less central. It's the customer who prefers Japanese goods. It's the service of the customer that matters. And where there's good management and cooperative workforce, we're still the best in the world.
But your government has been in power now for 4 months or so, and both the CBI's own review and the Financial Times survey both show a decline in confidence. Why is that, do you think? Why do you think that businessmen still have no confidence? Shouldn't there be even the tiniest little bit of an upsurge now?
I don't believe in instant cures, do you? You don't really think that anybody believes
Depends
on my
what
side
I've
of the
got.
house that, well, if you've got a long-standing relative decline in economic performance, which is what we've got in this country.
Yes, if I may interrupt you, because that's really what you anticipate my next question, because I was going to say to you that it is such a deep-rooted malaise that we've got that perhaps there is very little that can be done, and that to talk of cures is being over-optimistic.
Yes, to talk of cure as if it's going to happen overnight is quite misleading, but to talk of starting to improve the average performance is not at all misleading. After all, in Scotland, where that film was showing one picture, There are lots of American factories and British factories with great success stories. New factories built since the war, or more recently, with first-class management and generally cooperative labour forces, selling goods profitably all over the world. Not as profitably as we would wish, but successfully. So that in Scotland you could have shown a film of a success story. The problem the whole while is to create conditions in which a few more very good people go into management. It's a jolly difficult job to manage. And the unions often make it even harder, because not all the unions, not all the workforces are cooperative. Equally, is it true that not all the management is very good? But in this country, for generations, the establishment, the church, education, civil service, the political parties,
people like
teachers,
yourself, people like yourself.
Yes, certainly, people like myself have tended to look upon business and management as relatively easy and relatively squalid. And it isn't easy, and it isn't squalid. It's the basis for everything we want in this country, for the public services, for the social services, for defence, for standard of living, for jobs. And what this government is embarking upon, and I don't think there's much political disagreement about the objective, is creating conditions in which more good people go into management, and management is given more of a chance because it isn't overwhelmed by legislation, it isn't overwhelmed by regulation and controls, it isn't overwhelmed by high taxation, and it isn't badgered by bad industrial relations that are unnecessary, where good management has more of a chance of competing.
Do you think there are ways, though? You believe very passionately in private enterprise. There seems to be a shortage of galvanised entrepreneurs rushing towards the vacuum of Clydebank to take this skilled workforce. Has something gone out of private enterprise? Have they lost their nerve?
I don't think that there's a lack of entrepreneurs, though under the last government, it's a fact, a lot of people emigrated. A lot of people said our talents are not going to be rewarded here. It was not only entrepreneurs, but also craftsmen.
Those who do want the easy option?
Oh, dear me, management is not an easy option. But there's a limited number of people in any country who have the skill of founding a great new firm or industry. Who knows, there are now new singers being created in this country. Firms that, Mothercare is one that was illustrated on the film. I think there are plenty of potential entrepreneurs, but remember, it's only 6 months since a government was defeated at an election, which we believe overspent, overborrowed, overtaxed, and gave too many privileges to the trade unions. Now, you're not going to change that climate of opinion overnight. We've started the process, only started the process, that has to reduce the amount that the government takes as a proportion of the total national income. There's no other way to begin to abate inflation and to get jobs up. But the process won't occur overnight.
So, Keith, can I ask you specifically about one great British enterprise, Rolls-Royce?
Yes.
Stories today that you're going to take over, the Whitehall is going to take over the responsibility now exercised by the NEB. Why will that be better?
May I interrupt you? If and when I have anything to say about Rolls-Royce, I shall make an announcement.
Poor management there, though, isn't there?
Oh, who's making that judgment? Rolls-Royce has got a triumphant success story on its hands in the orders it's got. But I'd rather not go into detail about Rolls-Royce. When I have an announcement to make, I will make it.
What many people fear, though, is that you really have it in for the NEB and really that this is one more step in destroying that completely. And yet, don't we need the NEB to help those entrepreneurs of yours, for instance, who want to go into vital things like microtechnology? And if you destroy that, don't you destroy a lot of your entrepreneurs?
I don't think one should get the proportion wrong. The NEB may be useful at the margin, and that's why the new government has given it a function for a period with some money, limited amount of money, to create partnerships with private enterprise in certain new high technology ventures. It's got a definite usefulness on a limited scale, but don't imagine it's a magic wand.
Do you see its days numbered?
Oh, I don't look. How far can one look ahead? I see a useful role for the NEB on a relatively modest scale, as I tried to explain to the House of Commons when I introduced the industry bill, which is to a large extent about the NEB a couple of days ago, for a few years ahead. I can't look further than that.
One of your Britain's great enterprises, and one of its lame ducks, is British Leyland. Leyland might have been the better phrase. They are due a last payment of 225 million. You said you need some convincing about that money. Have you been so convinced?
Wouldn't you need some convincing if you had charge of that amount of the taxpayers' money? After all, it's not my money. It's not the government's money.
Have you been
convinced?
convinced?
It's the taxpayers' money. And I haven't even got a plan before me at the moment. British Leyland Board haven't officially put a plan to the National Enterprise Board, and therefore the National Enterprise Board haven't put a plan to me. When a plan, assuming one is put to me, then the government and I will have to make a judgment upon it.
How does your inclination go?
I wait to see the plan.
There's been some encouraging news from there, though, hasn't it? Does that encourage you to think that perhaps money might be well spent?
I think one has to look at, certainly the ballot result was a welcome indication, but one also has to look at other things, doesn't one, as well?
So, Keith, you know, I wonder whether since you've taken this job that you've found a gap between your philosophy and the reality. I noticed in the House of Commons on Tuesday some of those on your own side seemed to be almost suggesting that perhaps you were the minister likely to make the U-turn fastest. And Andrew Alexander in the Daily Mail said that perhaps your prayer was, Lord, make the state sector smaller, but not yet. Have you found reality rather different?
No, I found the nationalised industries even more worrying. The problem about the nationalised industries is that they don't have the compulsion, because they can't go bankrupt like a private firm, to adjust themselves quickly when things go wrong. Consequently, troubles pile up. And there are big problems, as you know, with British Steel and British shipbuilders, because centralised decision-making and the immunity from bankruptcy has made them far slower to adjust than private enterprise. No, I haven't found anything much different from what I expected. I expected it to be hard. It is hard. I expect the task of creating the framework in which things will start to improve themselves, as we identify, that can be done, and then time has to be allowed. But do remember that every day, every week, every month, there are firms going downhill and firms going uphill. There's birth as well as death. There's growth as well as decline. That's inevitable in any economy.
So, Keith, thank you very much indeed.